I should also mention the skeptics. Um, there were several important skeptics, and what was the skeptic school? The skeptic school is still a little bit withdrawn from the community. They're of the belief that you have to live in the community, you have to practice the religions and so on of the community, have to be a complete full member of the community, but actually you don't really believe any of it. So that's kind of, how you're going to behave while at the same time you don't believe any of it. That's the skeptical position, a little more ambiguous. I've met people that are clearly skeptical. They behave as if they're a member of, say, a church, and they do all the things they're expected to. But when you ask them, but do you really believe this theology? And they look at you like, really? Absolutely not. But they're kind of going to act that way. There's people that they grow up in a religion, and then they kind of graduate from it. They move on to other things. And then, later on, they maybe get married, start a family, and have children. And when the children are old enough, they think to themselves, we really ought to take the children to church so that they get a religious education, a religious foundation. And there's lots of sociological reasons why that might really be really correct thinking, right? But at that point, they look around, they pick a church where they can go that's probably going to be good for the children, has what they want, and they go and they join the church or whatever. And while they're there, they're participating. They're doing all the things. They're saying all the right prayers and singing the right songs and so on, and making sure their children are getting this experience. But when you ask them, you discover that they don't believe any of it. Of course, an important question for them is, are they happy? And that might not be the case, because they don't really have their heart into what they're doing. It's mostly, for the children, as opposed to satisfying their own inner search for meaning. So the skeptics are kind of interesting. And then the last ones that are really significant at this time are the Neoplatonists. Neo, of course, just meaning new, and Platonists are those that are followers of Plato. One of the more important ones is Plotinus. And Plotinus, I have his Aeneads here. And this also brings up the quiz question for today. So remember what the quiz question is. I should tell a funny joke to wake everybody up before I ask it. But the quiz question today is, what do you think of the golden ratio? You ever heard of it? The golden ratio. Lots and lots of interesting stuff about the golden ratio. What do you think of it? And you can look it up. Remember, this is an opinion question, so research it a little bit if you're not familiar with it. Some of the things are kind of interesting. Beauty, for example. There's an argument that the most beautiful faces are going to have some kind of balance associated with the golden ratio. Notice all sorts of living things follow the golden ratio. You might, what is the golden ratio? It's kind of like pi. You know how pi is kind of an infinitely non-repeating decimal when you figure out the circumference of a circle, and you get pi, the diameter of pi. What is it? 2 pi r squared equals the area of the circle, and so on. And pi is a decimal also that's 3.14, etc. It never ends. Some people, memorize it out to the thousandth, decimal or whatever. Phi, which is also what the golden ratio is also. So instead of pi, you get the Greek letter phi, or phi, I've heard some people say, has the same kind of characteristics. Try to figure out what it is. Except it's roughly half of pi. So that's interesting too. I've had some interesting math type folks talking about its possible relationship to nature, actually. Because when we look at nature and natural things, what we discover that even on our own bodies, you end up with this interesting ratio that is apparent in all living things, at least those things that haven't been damaged. So if it suffered damage, the balance in the living thing might not fit with phi. But when you look at beautiful faces and other kinds of interesting, I think Roger Penrose is one of my philosophers. I'm not sure if I have him on the list, but if he isn't, he should be. And you can pick him if you're interested. He's still alive, by the way. So it's interesting. Have a look at it and see what you think about it. But the reason I bring it up is because when we look at Neoplatonism and what's different from Plato. Remember, Plato gives us the idea that there's the ideas and the world of matter, right? And they're not really attached. In a metaphorical way, the sun kind of shines on the world, and as a result, we can see all the objects in it. But the sun is a metaphor in that sense. Remember the cave, the theory of the cave, the allegory of the cave, analogy of the cave. But in any case, for Plotinus, he's convinced that there's a physical connection between the world of the ideas and the physical world, and that the sun, in a sense, really radiates, and it's interconnected, and that while you are alive, you can actually visit that world if you do things exactly right. And what he means by that is kind of a meditative practice, perhaps drug-induced, I don't know. But in any case, if you do things right, you can be or participate in that ideal world. So it's a meditative technique. The way they've done studies, there's an interesting study. It's pretty old now, but it's why God won't go away. And in the book, the doctor takes a Buddhist monk and a Roman Catholic nun and puts them in an MRI or CT scan or whatever, and scans them while they're meditating. And he discovers that in both cases, when they're in full-fledged meditation, they've kind of closed down their brain from noticing the things around us, and instead you've kind of retreated to this part of the brain which we all have, but you have to be trained to use, that literally enables us to feel one with everything, which is a very powerful experience. And basically what the point of the training that you see in any society, any culture, literally has traditions associated with this kind of meditative practice, or maybe a drug associated with it, peyote or something of that sort. And the idea is that if you're focused on that part of the brain, you are literally one with everything. And it seems like Plotinus had been doing that. He said that he had had that experience at least 4 times in his life. And so you're escaping trouble through union with the one, which, you could call it God, you could call it the pen. The way to remember it is the pantyhose huan, which is not actually pantyhose, but that's just the way to remember it. It's the Greek word for the great all, the one including everything. So, for him, the focus is on the soul, not the body. But you can do that while still in the body, right? And so, a meditative practice. But he's also very interested in mathematics. So the golden ratio is clearly something that's part of his studies. He thinks that mathematics has this connection. It's kind of the language of God, if you think that way. Is this fun? So, by the way, one of the teachers of Plotinus was a... does this link work still? Nope, they're gone. Sorry about that. But one of his teachers was a Christian at the time. So when we're looking at Plotinus, notice he's a contemporary of Christians, 300 AD. And so the influence of Christianity on him is interesting. What kind of relationship is there? Next class, what we'll do is we'll move on to the Christians, and we're going to look at first the story of Jesus. So if you're not familiar with Jesus, I'll present kind of a quick summation of things that we know about Jesus, or the things we say about Jesus, and then talk about how Christianity became the religion of the empire. It's kind of interesting. One of my favorite authors on the subject is Peter Brown. Not that one. Let's go. This no, go away. So this Peter Brown, and he's written lots of books on the Christian period. One of the interesting things he says is, and the quiz question for today, of course, is what do you think of the golden ratio? The quiz question for next class will be, why do you think Christianity became the philosophy or the religion of the empire? How did Christianity tend to dominate there, right? His argument for it is that the success of the empire led to a lot of the people in the countryside, which is Pagano, right? They all multiplied because of the success and the peace of the empire. As a result of that, they ended up having to migrate to the cities because there wasn't enough land and things for them to do staying in the rural communities, so they migrated to the cities. So the cities ended up with a large inflection of migrants, foreign migrants. You might start thinking about some of our contemporary situations. Nowhere near as dramatic, I think. But in any case, the end result of that was poverty became a big dividing problem in the Roman Empire cities. And so what happened there seems to be that the rich Christians began organizing opportunities for those people to be cared for in those cities. And as a result, more and more people became Christians, and as a result, eventually, over a couple hundred years, the empire became Christian. Kind of interesting. Sociological reason. Questions for me? You guys having fun? More fun than any other class? Or I could do dances too. No. I had no talent. I know. Found that out in 1970. Well, I'm going to leave, but you can stay if you want. That's okay. Have a good weekend. Be safe. How many of you think we're going to have freezing this weekend? Make sure your hoses are empty and inside. If you have hoses. I don't know. Some of you might not have hoses. I already brought my hoses in. I actually don't bring them in. I just empty them and I fill them up